Open BraveWords Radio.
Welcome back to BraveWords Radio. Brought to you by Vox Protocol, the global leader in voice app entertainment. BraveWords Radio is an awesome musical extension of BraveWords.com, where we have been waving the flag of hard rock and heavy metal around the world for over 30 years. Since you have been here before, we hope you enjoy BraveWords Radio.
Anyways, please.
On a Friday, yes.
Yeah, I know. Please welcome to BraveWords Streaming For Vengeance, Mr. Ron Young from Little Caesar. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm well, thank you. We're here in rainy Los Angeles. We're going to get more ridiculous weather.
And you can probably see my neighbor with the snow on his roof as we get pounded again outside of Toronto. So nobody's happy.
Well, that's the problem. The problem is that there's literally places just up in the mountains here of LA that had blizzard warnings, 12 to 16 feet of snow on their roof, and now it's getting rained on and their roofs are collapsing. So,
Right.
You know, oh my God, what will the Kardashians do?
Oh, Jesus. I have an issue with the title of your book, because when I go around at shows, I'm like the freak. I have one tattoo, one piercing. I'm like totally the freak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, actually, you're the actual rebel now. You know, everybody's tattooed up to their ears.
Exactly.
It's the less tattooed or the non-tattooed that are the actual rebels. So, you know, I'm the conformist. People think I'm a chef or barista now. So, you know.
Yeah.
I used to think I was an axe murdering biker. Now they want to know how to make a good aioli reduction. You know? So it's just the sign of the times.
So to keep it a little more serious, April Wine had a really classic song called "Rock and Roll Is a Vicious Game," and perusing through your book, I'm like, yeah, this guy knows it.
It's pretty brutal, no doubt. You know, as AC/DC put it, ain't no fun waiting around to be a millionaire.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've had quite my career was as meteoric, and I was plummeting in a 3 to 4 week window that could ever happen in the music business. And it was numbing, and it was traumatic and very enlightening, to say the least.
How old were you during that time?
I was like 27. Yeah, in that range, 27, 28 years old. So not a baby, but, you know, had enough miles under the wheels in the music business to, you know, I guess be appetizing to the corporations, and just young enough to have, you know, some vibrancy. So.
But when you're 27 years old and walking into the Geffen offices, that's a little bit trembling.
Yeah, I mean, well, you get over it really quick when you start to realize that these people, you know, as soon as you say these people, you know, someone's an asshole. But anyway. But record executives, especially at that time, you know, they sort of, you know, they were all trying to be rock stars in their own realms in the corporate world. So you had a lot of personalities, and personalities a lot of times have a lot of egos, and a lot of egos can tend to be, they get very protective of their brand. And if things start going badly, they jump off like rats off a sinking ship, because they don't want the stink of trouble or failure on them. So in a period of a few years, I mean, literally right after the band's first show, we had, you know, infamous Jimmy Iovine became our manager. And within a few months after that, we had bidding wars to the point where we signed the largest recording contract ever given out to a new band in the history of the music business. So this is now 1988. Jimmy Iovine brings the famous John Kalodner of Aerosmith, AC/DC fame aboard as our A&R representative that's supposed to look out for the band's music and pick a producer. So he hooks us up with Bob Rock, who, at the time was just really known as a great engineer who did all the Aerosmith records. And he just started working with the Cult and these other bands. And we sit down with Bob and we tell him that we want to do something different than all of these hair metal bands, these pop metal bands. And we want to do a really gritty, honest, small sounding 70s kind of sonic record because we wanted to stand out. Plus, we felt that the band looked kind of that way. We didn't look polished or corporate. And Bob thought that was a great idea and was really excited about that. And so Bob Rock signs aboard, and we're getting ready to go up to start working with him. And all of a sudden, John Kalodner and him have a fight. And we wind up having to wait a year and a half to actually get to work with Bob. So when we finally get up and start working with Bob up in Vancouver, we pack up, we go up to the famous Little Mountain Studios. We start doing this really 70s kind of really cool, gritty, sort of honest record. And right in the middle of that, Bob, who in that window of time when John and him had the fight, he did the Motley Crue record, Dr. Feelgood. So the Dr. Feelgood record comes out and it goes to #1. And all of a sudden, Bob totally changes. He goes from wanting to make a 70s record and wanting to make a Little Caesar record to having Little Caesar make a Bob Rock record. And all of a sudden, we start doing all these overdubs, all these reverbs, and all these background singers, and all these keyboard parts. And we start freaking out. We call down to LA. And of course, John Kalodner's like, hey, man, he's got a #1 record. Just shut up and go with the flow. We're like, no, man, this is not going to work out well. This is not the kind of band that we are. And Jimmy Iovine's attitude was, hey, listen, man, wait till we do the mixes. When we start mixing it, we'll throw all that crap away and we'll just do the kind of record we talked about. Don't worry about it. Well, it comes down to mix down and these huge battles and fights start happening. And sure enough, we come up with this sort of in-between thing that, we weren't really thrilled with, but it was more polished than we wanted to do, but way less polished than Bob wanted to do. So here we have this record, and we're getting ready to release it, and MTV is all hot on the band because they saw us at some club shows, and they said, send us your first video. It'll immediately go into heavy rotation. And we're like, okay, great. So we're getting ready to release the record, and we hook up on the Kiss tour because Jimmy Iovine calls in a favor with Gene Simmons. We get on the Kiss tour. The record's not even out yet. We're out on tour with them for about 2 weeks. The record comes out. And then all of a sudden, in a 3-week window, David Geffen sells Geffen Records. Now, first of all, we got moved to a label called DGC. It was meant to break new bands. So It was only us, this band called Nelson of these really cute twins, and this, what they described, this was their words, this little college indie band that is really cool, but isn't going to be a big thing called Nirvana. So that was their take on Nirvana. So we're on this label. We have this label manager running the show, talking to MTV. We come out of the box, 120 ads at radio. We sold 160,000 records in a couple of weeks. All of a sudden, David Geffen sells Geffen Records to the Japanese. And all of a sudden, our records that are sitting in Warner Brothers warehouses now have to get shipped over to BMG because when we sold the label, they switched distributors. So here we are on MTV. We're on the charts. We're selling records. All of a sudden, all the records sell out. Nobody can reorder them. So there's no records in the stores. So we drop off the charts really quick. in the next week after that, the label manager at DGC gets fired for ejaculating on his secretary. And so we've got nobody running the actual label that got sold. And then the week after that, Jimmy Iovine announces that our manager announces he's starting Interscope Records. So David Geffen calls up Jimmy Iovine and he says, I want to distribute Interscope Records. I want to be the distributor. And Jimmy tells him to fuck off. So Jimmy and David get into this huge fight. And David, decides he's going to get even with Jimmy. He calls the band up and says, you've got to fire Jimmy Iovine because now that he's starting a label, you can't have your manager be a record distributor in California. It's against the law. Wow. So he made us fire Jimmy Iovine. So all of this happened in literally a 3 to 4 week window. The bottom fell out of our business. The bottom fell out of our management. The bottom fell out of our label. And we came home with this glazed look on our face, like, what the fuck happened? And everything was in complete disarray, and we never rebounded. In fact, David Geffen held a grudge about the band because when we got home, we started to get all these phone calls, what happened? And I started telling the truth. Billboard magazine, Variety, all of the trade magazines, and David Geffen got really angry about me being honest with the sale of the label, the firing of the label manager, the firing of Jimmy Iovine, all of this stuff. And David just got a hard-on for the band, and that was basically it. He pulled the plug on us and said, you're going to go bye-bye. And that's the nutshell story of our meteoric rise and fall.
Well, let me bring up another band that actually released before you on Geffen, which I thought it would have gone like through the roof. This is after Sykes got fired from Whitesnake. It's the Blue Murder record. And it did sound like it's not like it tanked, but it didn't go gold. And it should have been.
Let me tell you my Blue Murder story. I walked into Geffen one day, as I used to do, to go just make the rounds. And John Kalodner called me into his office because he had the mixes of the Blue Murder record. So it's John and Al Corey, the head of radio promotion, and he had a group of like 6 people in. So he invited me in, and he put on what was going to be the Blue Murder single. And he plays it, and everybody's kind of bopping their heads and all this stuff. And the track ends, and they all go around, oh my God, it sounds amazing and everything else. And John goes, what do you think, Ron? And I'm like, it's a great sounding record, but the hook isn't very strong for a single. This is what you're leading off with? And it was like the fart in church. And that's when me and John Kalodner stopped getting on well, because I just told him what I thought. He was telling me, God almighty, listen to the snare drum sound that Bob Rock got them. And I'm like, kids don't care about snare drum sounds, dude. You got to have a hook in the song. This is what... And that was, I should have kept my mouth shut.
Was it like the first video, Valley of the King, or was it Jelly Roll, the more mainstream?
I think it was Jelly Roll was the lead off. I thought it was good, but I didn't think, I just didn't think the song was the strongest song to lead off with. I can't remember which one it was. And again, in the same way that John Kalodner picked Chain of Fools for Little Caesar, I thought he picked it for all the wrong reasons. But again, this is John Kalodner, who Aerosmith wouldn't allow in the studio. AC/DC wouldn't be in the same room with this guy. So even though he's this living legend, a lot of people had problems with a lot of what John used to think and the way he used to approach music. So
just a quick aside about him. It was about a year ago that I learned where the Kalodner thing came from.
Yes.
With Foreigner's Double Vision, right?
Yes, it was, which oddly enough, see, this is the weird backstory with John Kalodner. My sister was an art director at Atlantic Records, and she did Foreigner covers.
Wow.
And so when I first met John Kalodner and walked in the room, I look exactly like my sister, except I have a goatee. She does not have a goatee. And he immediately goes, oh my God, you're Sandy Young's brother. And I'm like, yep. And he goes, are you gonna be as big a pain in my ass as Sandy is? I'm like, probably.
Dude, that is a
So,
great
this is the thing that clued me in about John Kalodner. I remember going up to Geffen and we had just got our first t-shirt printed, band t-shirts. So I brought him one. So I bring it in and I give it to him. And John goes, oh, thanks a lot, Ron. I really appreciate it. Let me return the favor. Come to my closet. So we go to his closet and John's got 4 t-shirt designs. He's an A&R guy with 4 t-shirts. The guy had more merch than any of the bands that he had on the label. So that tells you just a little bit about John Kalodner, his ego, and just where he thinks he fits in the pantheon of record industry execs.
You guys are a testament of the power of R&B, and there's just so many bands that really, they just thrived on that sound, on that, and the particular voices from that era. I know I'm really broadening it, but like, why Chain of Fools? Why did you gravitate towards that?
This was the strange thing about Chain of Fools. When I first put the band together, I realized living in LA that I couldn't look like a woman. I couldn't tease up my hair. I couldn't put on makeup. I couldn't put lipstick on. I had a goatee. I rode a Harley Davidson. And the music that I liked wasn't pop metal. The music I liked was music from the 70s. People like Paul Rodgers, Bon Scott, Ronnie Van Zant, all blues-based singers. And so I decided to put a R&B-based hard rock band, blue-collar working band. And we picked Chain of Fools as the first, when we put the musicians together, as a proof of concept, we picked Chain of Fools to see if we could do a hard rock version of it. And it just stuck with us. We didn't even want to put it on the record, let alone it to be the first single. But John Kalodner insisted that he thought it was his reasoning was Van Halen broke with You Really Got Me, so we'll break with Chain of Fools. I'm like, what does one thing have to do with the other? But whatever. But I'm really glad that you pick up on the R&B influence. I mean, we did a Aretha Franklin cover on our first record, and we did a Temptations cover. Because that's the music, to me, all the bands I grew up on were blues-based and rhythm and blues-based bands. Rolling Stones, Bad Company, AC/DC, all of those bands.
Well, you look at how the success that Vanilla Fudge had with You Keep Me Hanging On. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
In 1967, right?
And don't get me wrong, we were doing really well with Chain of Fools until everything dropped out from underneath us. But, so I don't think it was necessarily the wrong choice, but we wanted to go with something original more than a cover tune. So,
but I'm doing my research. Well, I read Keith Richards' biography about a year ago, and they just, like, both him and Mick, they just dove into all that classic R&B, all that.
Yeah, man, they all worshipped American rhythm and blues.
In the first 2 or 3 records, half of them were covers, and I found it interesting that the person that wrote Chain of Fools, Don Covey, he wrote another song called Mercy Mercy, which was the first track on Out of Our Heads, the album that had I Can't Get No Satisfaction on.
Right. Listen, the Rolling Stones, Van Morrison, the Beatles, all of these bands, all of these English bands worshiped American blues artists and rhythm and blues artists. And that's the music they were trying to emulate. And they basically, bumped up the tempo a little bit, put more grit in the guitars, and that's what became rock and roll. I mean, Elvis Presley, same thing. He was a white guy doing black music. And, the nature of culture and the nature of the music business, that was a sort of edgy, dangerous thing. But by the 60s, that was all sonically and sort of politically acceptable for radio stations to play. And all of these bands just exploded, coming out of England, worshiping American blues and rhythm and blues.
And you would really do yourself a favor if you actually connected the dots to that classic R&B and all those guitar players that taught Hendrix how to play, that taught Clapton how to play, and all those guitar players taught Eddie Van Halen and Angus Young, and
exactly. I mean, all those Chuck Berry licks and all of those classic, they're all trying to be Steve Cropper. A lot of You know, a lot of Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood parts are, you know, are based off of all of that Stax and Motown and soul stuff. And, you know, so it was all blues based licks. And that's one of the things that was frustrating me once I started to become of age to put a band together. Music, you know, all of that hair metal stuff went away from the blues and went to more pop melodies, you know, and not blues based scales. And so that's why I wanted to get back to it and get back to that more gruff, bluesy singing style rather than that, what they call the mask, up in that nasal Brian Johnson, Axl Rose, Mark Slaughter, Tom Keeper kind of singing style.
What the simple question is, what did KISS teach you and what didn't they teach you?
They taught us how to play on a big stage, how to work a big stage. What they didn't teach us was how to get ready for the big change that came and swept everybody, including them, away. You know, at this time, Gene Simmons was giving me crap for wearing a goatee. And then 6 weeks after we left the tour, Gene's got a goatee. So, you know, so much for the master, you know, heeding his own input, you know. But yeah, we learned a lot, you know. The funny thing is some of these things I learned is that Gene doesn't have a sense of humor about a lot of things, but you know, he used to come on our bus and scream at us for watching Spinal Tap. He didn't think that was a funny movie at all. He thought that was completely insulting to him and everything he held dear, which we thought was hysterical.
Yeah, okay. And only one person does it, apparently.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what? One thing, you just mentioned it. So there's one key to the longevity in the music business, I think, and that is having a sense of humor.
Oh, I agree. You know, I don't badmouth anybody. I will note people that are really great, but I got to say that after all of these decades being in the business and being behind the scenes, you know, as a production manager at a nice venue here in LA, you know, I met and worked with all of these people, and you know, everyone from Prince to Van Halen to, you know, Bon Jovi, you know, and all the way down through the ranks, all the hair metal bands. And it's the guys that got it early on that this was all kind of goofy and kind of a joke, and not to take it very seriously and to not let their egos get in the way. And the ones that really stayed down to earth and being able to laugh at it all are the ones that are still successful, that are still content, and then have some sort of a life that's in balance, you know.
There was a video of KISS with they were being interviewed by a South American journalist who was wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt, and they stopped the interview and they wanted the guy to switch his t-shirt. So KISS is kind of, I'm not the biggest KISS fan on the planet, but that really disappointed me when they pulled that stunt.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories like that about, you know, especially Gene, not as much Paul, but Gene's the one that gets really offended by things. I think he does a lot of it to just get people like you and me talking about something that's this ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he's a master at that. He could care less what anybody thinks about him. And the reality is I've seen him be incredibly warm and funny and generous and kind. And then I've seen him be this complete misogynistic, sort of nasty tempered scumbag. And the fact that both people can exist is really kind of bizarre to kind of figure out, you know. And I think he's way more of a master of his own personality than people can figure out.
Mortality, and we're watching KISS on the final tour and the Scorpions, and who knows what AC/DC is going to happen.
Which final tour are we discussing? This is like the sixth final tour, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. And then you look at Pantera coming back, and it's I don't know, it kind of pulls at the heartstrings. That it's not like everything's ending, but when you see the deaths of Jeff Beck and Eddie Van Halen, and you know what I mean, it's
Listen, this is this is a really, really bizarre and sad time in the music industry, because we're talking about the legends of rock and roll. Rock and roll goes through its thing, but we're talking about in its heyday, so from the mid 60s to say even the mid 80s, that 20-year period. There's now the pioneers of this who are passing away. Then there's a whole bunch of bands that are beating it to death. Bands that really should hang it up by now because they can't even sing or play anymore. And they're out there taking people's money. And they're doing it because I don't know if it's a combination of a money grab and because they don't know what else to do with their life. And this is what defines them. So they keep doing it. I don't think it's really fair to the fans on the level of bands that can't play or sing anymore. There's bands out there that call themselves a band name and there's one or no original members left. It's really kind of bizarre. And I really, really hope that because right now there's also these incredible economic pressures after COVID, especially, right, that's really a dent in live music and what it means. Because I mean, let's be honest, the record buyers and the fans are everywhere from 45 to 70 years old. That's not the age group that should be packing into live music venues to see a band during a pandemic or right after a pandemic. And it's really hurt attendance on one side. It's really hurt the business because bands that rely on guarantees from promoters who aren't offering the same money, they can't do their business the way they used to. And it's really, really disruptive. This is kind of behind the scenes stuff. But when you're talking about at the same time, bands that are passing away, legends passing away, or, not being able to really play the music as well as they used to, we're in this sort of twilight of a lot of, historic music. And I don't know how that's going to pan out. It's really kind of crazy.
Well, and speaking of tragic passings, this is one of my collectibles. The original.
I fronted that band for a tour.
Well, that's when Michael said that. Sorry, I try to do most of my research, and I'm like, really? I had no idea.
Yeah, you can't. There was one show from Toronto that was a great show that was on some peer-to-peer file sharing network. Could never find it because I really wanted to hear the audio of it. But
that's where that CD got signed, at Rock and Roll Heaven, and it was a fucking madhouse.
Yes, it was a madhouse, and there was like a fight that broke out, and Dave Lismy got clocked in the head with a beer bottle and dove into the audience, and I had to dive in after him, and it was bedlam. It was pure rock and roll, just deliciousness, and it was really, I was hoping that was going to be a new phase for that band, and it just never came together. But you talk about tragedy between Dimwit and Frank Starr passing away, just a phenomenal, again, the kind of band that I can relate to because they were down to earth, they were honest, they were blues based, they weren't hair metal, they were really kind of a working class band. And that's the kind of music that I thought was going to be something that endured and stuck around. And unfortunately for that band, what a great, great band, it all started to implode, because of factors, tragic factors,
How are you adapting to all these new business models and the fact that vinyl is helping bands survive these days? If you would have told me that 10 years ago, I would have said, my God, what the hell are you smoking, man?
Yeah, well, but again, that's a relative term. Vinyl is outselling CDs to the real niche collectors, the passionate ones.
Right.
But more of a reflection of how bad CD sales are than really how great vinyl sales is. There's no sales that bands are like raking in royalties from sales. Hard copy sales of music are completely in the toilet. So bands don't have revenues from that. If you look, streaming has replaced 80% of how listeners listen to music. And the royalties on that are so slim for bands that they can't really survive. So the only way a band can survive is to go out and play live and sell merchandise. And hopefully they can make enough revenue of that to cover the cost of recording new music and putting out new music. The whole business model has been completely upended.
Do you remember the first vinyl record you bought?
I did. It was Deep Purple, Machine Head.
Nice. You're dating yourself. No.
Oh, totally, dude. I am an old son of a bitch. Yeah. Yes, Deep Purple, Machine Head, and Black Sabbath, Paranoid, I think were my two first vinyl. Scared the crap out of my parents when they heard that coming out of my speakers, you know. But yeah, there was something about going to a record store and taking your limited funds as a kid and, oh my God, what am I going to pick? I don't even know. There's so many great
get one.
Yeah,
One,
I know.
One a week if you're lucky.
Oh, no. And we used to, like, all my friends used to go, okay, well, you buy this one and I'll buy this one. And then we used to have switch and swapping. Once you beat it to death, everybody would swap, you know? And that was the joy of music. Music occupied such a huge part of my social. It was everything. It was my social everything. It was what bonded all my friends. It's what made me wake up in the morning looking forward to hearing that there's a new record coming out and we can all go stand in line and buy the tickets and, wait for the magazines to come out to read all the stories. And oh my God, it was such an incredibly delicious time of my life.
When I was running or launching the magazine, I was also in retail, and I miss that moment where you had a special day that the record would come out. It would be Tuesdays in the late 80s and 2000s, and now shit just appears like overnight sometimes.
Yeah, randomly, yeah, and it's in a digital format or whatever, and you can order the vinyl, but all of a sudden, boom, it's up for download. And
look at what Maiden did and look at what Metallica did. Maiden just out of the blue, new record. What?
Yeah, boom, drops it. Yeah, they just drop it. And it's really crazy because I know so many people who it changes so quickly and it's so upside down and backwards. I mean, the reality is the record business is now the data business. The new music is there to get attention for bands, to get as many people to their YouTube videos or to so that they get ad revenue. They get the eyeballs. That's what they monetize. It's not the music anymore. And it's so bizarre, that it's turned around like that.
A couple of quickies for you, just more fan stuff. What do you think the most played album is in your lifetime?
The most played album in my lifetime would probably be AC/DC Powerage.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah, I'm still stupefied by the band's dynamic nature, sense of humor, everything about it. It's like one of those desert island records.
Where are you on the Bon versus, I hate the word versus because I'm a fan of both, but the Bon versus Brian?
To me, no comparison between Bon Scott and Brian Johnson. It's Bon Scott all the way. Brian Johnson came in beautifully after Bon Scott, and that transition where the band started to shift to that, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, talk about an incredible, two amazing records with two different frontmen in it, and it made the band survive. But there's no comparison. But again, that's a relative term because I love Brian Johnson too. I just adore Bon Scott. Yeah.
Is there one person that you can pinpoint that got you to pick up this thing called a microphone and start singing?
It was a combination of Michael Jackson and Paul Rogers. It's like, Michael Jackson floored me. I grew up in New York City, so I was subjected to so much rhythm and blues and radio. You know, this was Temptations, all the Motown, Stax Volt stuff, and then all the rock and roll that the rock stations were playing. So it was just this cornucopia of great music. And so here I am at 10 years old and hearing another 10-year-old sound like he's 40 years old in Michael Jackson, and had this incredible vocal range and depth at the same age as me. And then a couple of years later, I start listening to rock and roll, and I realized that, oh my God, the same soul that Michael Jackson had, Paul Rogers has in his own way, in the same way Aretha Franklin and Etta James and Ray Charles and all that. And he showed me in a rock and roll realm just how soulful you can be in front of a rock band. And that was when I was like, oh my God, I might be able to do this. I didn't have the balls to try it for 10 years later, but you know, that's what it was.
And when you started to perform live, what was the one band, or even to this day, the one band that you sit and look at and go, holy fuck, we need to be this good?
Oh, wow. You know, when I started to actually have to contemplate that, because I was trying to be in the music business, at that time it was AC/DC, you know, watching them on television shows and watching just how much fun they were having, and how the energy, the boundless energy of at the time Bon Scott and Angus Young. I was like, oh my God, this is just this freight train that, you know, nobody, it was like guys like that, and then the sort of swagger and soul of Rod Stewart, you know, and the bass, you know.
I really, when Malcolm died, because he was more rhythm, I'm like, holy fuck, this guy has probably taught more guitar players how to actually play the guitar than anyone else on the planet.
Oh, listen, by far, you are so right on the money with that. And I remember reading an interview with Angus, and Angus said that Malcolm is a better lead player than Angus was.
Wow.
But Malcolm loved holding down the fort. He loved being the dynamic glue of the power of the guitars, and realized that by muting chords and then opening up chords and the chunky rhythm underneath, that was the engine of AC/DC. And Angus knew it, you know, and it was, what an incredible team, you know.
And you had Angus running around everywhere, Bon, Brian, but Malcolm, aside from doing the odd little background vocal, you could have nailed his feet down. He was just, as you say, right?
Totally. And between that and you know, Phil Rudd, just no fills, just time, just keeping time. No flash, no wizardry, you know, none of that going on. It was so incredibly simple and powerful. And you know, it's like they never needed pyro or lights. They had Angus running around, and they had the anchor of just the freight train that was the band behind it. And then Bon Scott and Brian both just standing there, no fancy clothes, just grabbing that microphone and being the focal point out to the audience. Just masterful.
Just a couple more quickies for you, and not to take it down a morbid path, but I was on the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise in 2020, and on the Sunday I heard that Neil Peart had passed, and I'm a massive Rush fan. Obviously, it's not just a Canadian thing. There's a lot of really passionate.
I mean, that's one of the inventors of progressive rock. You know, I mean, right. And his playing is, you know, superb.
And I went back to my cabin, I poured a bourbon, and I put on a Rush playlist, and I'm like, fuck, I can't listen to this. So my morbid question is, when you hear about these deaths, like, how do you celebrate the legacy, or do you just cry, or, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, it's a mournful feeling. I listen to it, and you know, the sense of loss, especially because I just don't feel like there's anybody coming up to fill the voids of these people, you know? Rock and roll has fallen back so far in market share, so to speak, and in its cultural importance to the next generations. And I just kind of feel like there's these are the people that, you know, they launched 1,000 guitar players, and they launched 1,000 singers, and they launched 1,000 drummers, you know, and when you lose them, I think you lose some of that propagation, you know, and it doesn't bode well for the future, you know.
And no disrespect to this band, but Dirty Honey ain't doing it like AC/DC.
No, you've got the Dirty Honey, you've got the Greta Van Fleets,
right?
You've got this next wave of bands that are obviously very much influenced. You can hear where their influences come from, and I'm grateful for the fact that they're getting some notoriety, and they're obviously wearing their influences on their sleeves. But it sounds like, you know, an imitation to me, you know?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like there's any innovation in the way that the Rolling Stones listened to, you know, Slim Harpo and took something to a new place, you know. But there's other bands for me, like, you know, Rival Sons, that I think are great. Vintage Trouble, because to me, with rock and roll and rhythm and blues, you know, Ty is one of my favorite singers in the last 20 years. But again, here's a band that opens up for the Rolling Stones. They open up for The Who. They open up for AC/DC, and nobody really even knows about them.
Yeah.
You would, after opening up for those three bands, people would, their sales would be off the charts, but it's not, you know. And there's some reasons for that musically, because of they never hit song. But I also think they just don't have the support of radio and the machinery that the bands that they got to open up for had the blessing of, which is unfortunate.
No, exactly. So my final question is, talk to me about the future. What's going on post-book?
Well, post-book is, I'm really just super blessed that I've had enough of 15 Minutes of Fame to be able to continue making music with the guys that I love, doing what I love for people that I love. It's in clubs and it's in small places, and I don't have any delusions of making enough money out of it. It's a journey of the spirit, and it's a journey of sonics than it is of finances. So I just keep getting to knock out weekend runs out to different sections of the world. I'm trying so hard. We've been trying for 4 years to get back up to Toronto, Ottawa area, with places like Rockpile and you know, it just, you know, getting up to that neck of the woods. And I'm hopefully going to work that out. We were supposed to come up there with Junkyard, and because of immigration fights between the Canadian government and our, at the time, current president, and they were having a pissing match and were way much stricter than they had been, we wound up having to cancel that weekend. So we're trying to reschedule that.
Nice. We would love to have you back in Toronto.
Oh yeah, Brass Monkey and Rockpile. That's where we're trying to get up to those, owned by great people. Great. Yes. I can't wait to get up and play to the fans in those two venues.
Awesome. Ron, thank you so much. What a great chat, dude. Thank you.
Thanks for the great questions, man.
All right. You enjoy your weekend.